It's great to see everyone here, and yeah, just kind of to acknowledge, firstly, I mean, just happy holidays to everyone. We kind of Hanukkah's passed and Christmas has passed and Boxing Day. Any of you who celebrate Boxing Day, wonderful. Boxing of the presents that the wealthy used to do for the less well-off. And that's come down to us in certain places. And then Kwanzaa and what about anything I'm missing that just this holiday season, the solstice, of course, and the New Year coming up. And we were sharing, if you joined us a little, in the last couple of minutes, just how unusual this holiday season is, and made even more unusual obviously by the pandemic and how that makes it very difficult to be close to loved ones, physically close, and for many of us doing very kind of separate, maybe with one or two people holiday period, how unusual that is. And a lot of Zooming. I Zoomed with some of my family members yesterday back in the UK and Spain, and that's so unusual. And then just the level of suffering. We're talking about what's happening in Southern California and California generally, and then what's happening in the UK right now is very, very tough as well, and other places. And then, but particularly here, because we have, I have to be careful of my language here, so to frame it in ways that don't create separation, but we have our unique, in the United States, unique challenges that come out of the responses to COVID, and also the nature of who we have in office right now that make things even more challenging. Just how 14 million people, I think close to that number, who I think yesterday, about just getting the days accurate, have lost access to unemployment, the $300 unemployment checks. 11 million become susceptible, become, I don't want to say eligible because that suggests it's a good thing, but become liable to eviction, I think at the end of the year. And so just how much additional suffering on the top of the suffering that people are already experiencing through the pandemic, and the measures that have been taken or not taken to deal with that, just brings, just has brought an additional level of suffering that everybody here, I think, is very, very aware of and very familiar with. And one thing I can say is I am deeply grateful for the fact that we will have, and I'm confident, I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic that in 23, 24 days from now, we will have an administration coming into office that is committed to honesty as kind of the coin of the realm rather than dishonesty, compassion rather than cruelty, and a wish at least to bring people together, a commitment to bringing people together rather than using false information and using whatever is at hand to divide people from each other. We'll look back at this period of history, I think, with hopefully with what we can learn from it, to, you know, in a kind of never again kind of way. The cost of what we've been through in the last 4 years were at least enough, alongside the pandemic, to ensure that we elected a new administration. And I share all this not from a place of intending in any way to create separation. And I know I know there's a variety of views among us, even whatever we believe, there's a multiplicity of views. And anything I share, I don't share to, you know, in any way of like righteousness or I told you so or any of those things, but just to some sense, and I've spoken to this in recent weeks, just to acknowledge as much as I can the truth of the situation, just to name what I feel it's appropriate to name, and not to overdo it, because I know, you know, even to talk about it can create a sense of like, oh, I don't want to go there right now, and just to recognize that. So just to name that, and then for today, for here, you know, in terms of the specifics of that, to leave that there, and to come back to just the kind of the practice that we come together to share, that really gives us the skills and the tools to be able to hold everything that we're dealing with. And so many of us, each of us, I think, in our own ways, are dealing with our own share of kind of this collective suffering that we're in the middle of. And we have our own specific expressions of it, you know, whether it's, you know, loved ones that we're concerned about, or maybe we're concerned about our own health or our own situation, or we're concerned about our own livelihood or financial situation, maybe. That whatever it is that we're dealing with, these teachings and practices of mindfulness and compassion, loving kindness, equanimity, the whole range of these wisdom teachings that have come down through 2,500 years, this kind of amazing mandala of teachings of the Buddha that have come down to us, that even though the Buddha was alive 2,500 years ago in a very, very different culture and a very, very different time in history, you know, almost unrecognizable compared with what we're living in through today, because he was able to connect with the deepest truths about life. You know, these are framed in what are known as the Four Noble Truths, but the truth about suffering and the end of suffering, that even though we've gone through all of these incredible changes in history, particularly the changes of the last, say 300, 400 years of, you know, the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, just all of the changes, the technology, all of that, that the essence, the essential teachings are as applicable at the end of 2020 as they were, you know, 550 or whatever before the current era, you know, BC as you know, typically talked about, before Christ, before the Christian era. That these teachings are as applicable and as helpful as ever to us. And that's really what we keep coming back to. We come back to just the support of the fundamental teachings about suffering and the end of suffering, to simply see in a moment-to-moment way, am I caught up in suffering? Am I clinging? What am I holding on to? And in this period, one of the things that we're holding on to a lot of us get caught up in, is we're clinging to our views and opinions. You know, that's one of the ways we you know, there's so much division in our society right now. You know, divisions about, you know, should we be wearing masks and social, you know, should we be distancing it, you know, and probably the vast majority of us on this call would be kind of, that's a no-brainer, but not for everyone. And that's a cleavage, you know, and we suffer on the basis of those cleavages, depending on whether, you know, the way we hold on to the views and opinions, which is not to say we shouldn't have views and opinions, but not just that we shouldn't cling to them. So coming back, you know, as we do to the teachings, to the practices, and how they support us, how they help us kind of untangle ourselves. And, you know, I gave a talk 9 days before the election. And that talk was about, it was about hope, and hope in these times, and really about the importance of hope. And I spoke then about how we can, you know, many of us, I think it's been really challenging. It's been really difficult getting through these last 4 years, and we've developed defenses to not, you know, to kind of hold on and to struggle through, and how in some ways, you know, the defenses that we've developed, sometimes really necessary, can prevent us, these defenses and the kind of resistance that we put up to what we feel is coming in, that feels like too much for us. That I use the term quite often, unmourned grief. The kind of the grief that we've experienced in so many different ways, things that have happened that we haven't even had time to allow ourselves to feel, to allow ourselves to experience before we've gone on to the next thing that we need to kind of respond to or defend ourselves against, this unmourned grief. And I think it, in some ways, it can kind of close us down. And I believe, and I spoke then about the importance of hope. And I want to, in some way, kind of revisit that, particularly as we're at this time of the kind of the solstice, the kind of the going from the shortest day and the days getting longer, and the, you know, the end of the year and the beginning of the new year, and a new administration coming in, and kind of to invite us again to open to hope. And I want to share some reflections about that to begin today. Because I do believe that this is a time for us to be intentional. There's a way in which we can use these times. You know, there may be times on a calendar, you know, it could be the solstice, could be the end of a year and the beginning of a year. There's a wisdom, I think, in using those times to really become intentional and reflect on our lives and our practice and what we want to cultivate and what we want to let go of. You know, typically at this time of year, just in a normal year, many people kind of think to themselves, oh, new year beginning. I need to get into being healthy, eating healthy, doing exercise, all of these, you know, good things to do, and not doing those bad things. So, you know, let's begin this, you know, in a new way and let go of the unhealthy things. And there actually is a wisdom in that, but typically the way we go about it is we think, because we have good intentions, that those will easily be given effect to. But as I've written about in the books that I've written on habit change, habits are so strong that they have a kind of a stickiness to them, that even when we have good intentions, the habits kind of can continue, and it can be hard to develop new habits, new ways of thinking, new ways of behaving. So we really need to bring these practices, particularly the practice of awareness, into it. Having said that, my intention isn't to talk so much about that today, but to reflect on these periods where how we can use these times to really concentrate our attention and our intentions. I'll tell you a personal story. In my life, kind of going back almost 30 years, I kind of formally got involved in insight meditation practice around 30 years ago. I'd had one of these experiences. I've shared this maybe once or twice at other times, maybe in the mid-80s, where I'd kind of picked up a book, and I'd been in a very busy period of my life, and something happened. I had this kind of opening in my mind that kind of set me on a path to getting interested in spiritual teachings and in Eastern philosophy and Buddhism and the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads and the Dhammapada and all of these kind of, as well as Christian and Jewish mysticism and all of that, and kind of set me on a path. And I was on that path for about 5 years before I got into, or on that journey for a few years. And then I found the insight meditation community up in Barre, Massachusetts, and did a retreat there. And so I began a practice. I was still very involved in organizing work around Latin America, Central America in the 1980s, and it was work that I very much cared about. I was very much into doing, and I continued doing that work through the 1990s. But the more I got into the meditation practice and doing retreats, and I went on a couple of kind of visits, pilgrimages to India and to where the Buddha, the Bodhi tree, where the Buddha was awakened, and kind of was very much deepened into this practice of insight meditation, of vipassana, Buddhist teachings, etc. And I kind of came to a point at the end, as the 1990s were coming to an end, and we were getting to that, Y2K and the kind of change of the millennium. Remember what a big deal it was. It was like 1999 was going to become 2000, it kind of, and there were all the kind of fears of technology and all of that, Y2K. But for me, I kind of thought, I'm at this stage, I'm getting deeper and deeper into the teachings, the Buddhist teachings. And my main teacher at that time, Christopher Titmuss, had said to me, oh, maybe you should start thinking about teaching, teaching meditation, teaching mindfulness, teaching Buddhist teachings, etc. Well, yeah, maybe I might do that, because I'd practiced for about, a decade or so. And so it was coming to the end of the 1990s. And I asked myself the question, I said, where do I want to be on the 31st of December, 1999, as the kind of millennium turns to January 1st, 2000. And I thought about this for a while, and I said, I want to be under the Bodhi tree in India, where the Buddha was enlightened, was experienced, kind of awakened to the truth, to the Four Noble Truths, etc. So I said, okay, this seems like it could be a good time for me to make a change in my life, to kind of consciously shift from, being, working in advocacy and organizing work, and actually make the shift to Dharma teaching, teaching meditation, teaching mindfulness, teachings, sharing the Buddhist teachings. So what I did was I took that kind of that date, you know, this kind of, which is a completely mind-made date. There's nothing significant, you know, it's no different fundamentally from June the 3rd, 1992, you know, whatever it might be, you know, it's just a date on a calendar. But I chose specifically to use that date on the calendar to ask myself that question. Kind of, I wasn't familiar with Mary Oliver's poem, but you know, we all know probably the lines of, tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? I was kind of answering that question without knowing that particular question, but I was answering a similar question. Like, what is it that I want to do with the rest of my life? What is it I care about most deeply? You know, where is my heart? Where does my heart really want to go? And even though I cared about the work I was doing, my heart was really in, you know, in practicing and sharing in whatever way I could the teachings of, you know, what we call the Dharma, you know, the teachings and practices of the Buddha, and, you know, and I'd share them both in the kind of Buddhist teachings, but also in the secular kind of mindfulness-based stress reduction, mindfulness in workplaces, and that as well, slightly different, you know, language, but grounded in, for me at least, grounded in these Buddhist teachings. And so I chose to make that choice. And so I went to India and I sat under the tree, and the Dalai Lama was supposed to come, but because of security, he didn't come. But I was there with hundreds of other pilgrims under the tree, and then did a couple of, you know, 3 weeks of meditation retreats after that, and then came back, and then over the years kind of gradually got into the teaching and all of that. But I share that story, not a particular, it's my personal story, but just as a kind of a to illustrate really the way for me in which I was able to use what was really just a date on a calendar. But for me, it's been this really mark of demarcation in my life. You know, it was almost like a before and an after. You know, it's not like obviously I carried over a lot of from my life till then, obviously all of the things we, you know, that make us who we are. But there was something about that, choosing to do that. There was something about being conscious and intentional that for me has kind of helped me focus my life, you know, to focus and say, and to come back and say, oh, you know, what is it that's important to me? You know, what is it that I really care about? And it's something, certainly, it's certainly something I don't for one second regret, and in fact is something that gives me, you know, enlivens me. It kind of helps me to stay focused, and if I get depressed or kind of down about things, to remember what really matters. And so I share the story really in a sense as a kind of an encouragement or an invitation, if, you know, not necessarily, you know, this week or this day, but to invite you, if you know you're inclined to do it, to really to reflect in your own life. What is really important to you? What is it that you want to make a commitment to? What is it you care about most deeply? And I want to frame it again, as I did a couple of months ago, in relation to hope, and perhaps the kind of the other side of hope I could think of as grief. You know, in one sense, doing two things: opening to anything that we're holding, any sadness, any grief, anything that wants to be let go of, so that it doesn't remain kind of stuck within us, you know, kind of locked in our bodies, but that it can be kind of liberated. There's something really powerful and I'm sure many of you are familiar with this in your own life, but there's something very, very powerful in grieving, in allowing ourselves to open to and really feel the sadness of what needs to be open to. And, you know, as I've shared, and I was saying at the beginning of this reflection, I believe that we are, many of us, and I feel, I'm certainly speaking for myself, holding some unmourned grief, some things that we haven't been able to or allowed ourselves to really fully process. I haven't, as I'm just thinking right now, I'm kind of almost tearing up. I don't think I've really fully processed the separation of children on the border from their parents and the cost of that. I'm certainly cognizant of it in my intellect and my awareness and being appalled by it. But on a heart level, I feel, just as I'm speaking about it right now, I can feel the sadness and the grief for those children and those families. That I don't think I've fully been able to allow myself to feel, to grieve, to hold those the sadness and to open to the sadness. And I feel the more that I'm able to do that, the more my heart is able to open and for me to engage, you know, with in this period that we're going into. So I use that just as an example, just came to me in the last couple of minutes of, you know, the many things that I think that we're holding, particularly coming out of this last 4 years and coming out in even more specific ways out of this pandemic period of the last 10 months, the kind of coming together of those two, you can always say two viruses. There's I had the good fortune to connect with, I know some of you are familiar, many of you might be familiar with Brain Pickings, Maria Popova. She puts out a weekly and sometimes more bi-weekly sharing, and they're amazing things she shares. And I just, you know, sometimes they come into my whatever mail and I don't see them, and then I kind of go back to it. And I was just connecting last night with some things she was sharing from Rilke, who's really a love, you know, in poetry, and for me, an extraordinary human being. He died very young. I think he was only 50 years old, 51 years old. Had an experience, an amazing poet and writer. Also happened to be what's his name's Rodin's assistant, Auguste Rodin, at the late 1800s. Kind of interesting life that just happened to, that was just a piece of his life that he, you know, he worked with Rodin, but I went back to some of Maria Popova's sharings from Rilke, and a number of things kind of jumped out at me. But I want to share this about opening to sadness, kind of speaking to what I've just been talking about. This was from his, I believe this was from his Letters to a Young Poet. He says, "You have had many and great sadnesses which passed, and you say that even this passing was hard for you and put you out of sorts. But please consider whether these great sadnesses have not rather gone right through the center of yourself, whether much in you has not altered, whether you have not somewhere at some point of your being undergone a change while you were sad," you could say while you were grieving. "Were it possible for us to see further than our knowledge reaches, and yet a little way beyond the outworks of our divining, perhaps we would endure our sadness with greater confidence than our joys. Perhaps we would endure our sadnesses with greater confidence than our joys. For they are the moments when something new has entered into us, something unknown. Our feelings grow mute in shy perplexity. Everything in us withdraws. A stillness comes, and the new, which no one knows, stands in the midst of it and is silent. For they are the moments when something new has entered into us, something unknown. Our feelings grow in shy perplexity. Everything in us withdraws. A stillness comes, and the new, which no one knows, stands in the midst of it and is silent. So, in order for us to be able to move forward with our hearts open, it's really important for us. I think it's really essential for us to do the work of opening our hearts to our own sorrow, our own sadness, our own grief, anything that is unprocessed, anything that's stuck within us, to use these practices, these skills of compassion, of awareness, of kindness, that allows us to open. Sometimes it has to be a very gradual way. If things feel too tight, too stuck, too hard, we might have to, it might almost be like dropping little drops of water eroding the stone. But allowing ourselves the space to do this is a great gift to ourselves. It's something that's so essential for our lives. So that's really where one side of kind of the equation, in a way, is to allow our space, allow ourselves the space to open to our sadness, to our grief, to the unmourned grief. You know, different ways we can do that. We can do it through ritual. We can do it through inquiry, asking, you know, what needs to be open to, what's calling for attention, through meditation, through just the practice of kind awareness of our experience. And when we do that, then we can open to, in a sense, the kind of the second practice that I want to reflect briefly on today. And that is the practice of opening to possibility, opening to hope, opening to a story of possibility for ourselves, for our loved ones, for our world. You know, what is possible? To invite that question for ourselves. And as I've said, you know, there are times when that question can feel particularly appropriate, maybe particularly poignant at specific times. And now feels like all that we've been through feels like a time for us to engage in that way, in asking ourselves questions about what we're hoping for, what we care about most deeply. And there's a wonderful teaching from Jack Cornfield, teaching of the role of the Bodhisattva. And for those not familiar, Bodhisattva means a being of enlightenment, somebody committed to awakening the heart, awakening the mind. And it's a quality, or if you like, it's a kind of an archetype that we can choose to embody. We can say to ourselves, and just parenthetically, today in what I'm sharing, I'm not specifically speaking only to being a bodhisattva or seeing ourselves. I'm speaking more broadly than that today, but just using that, beginning there with that archetype of where we see our role in the world and we commit ourselves not just to our own freedom, but to the freedom of all beings, the awakening of all beings. So there's a conscious and intentional connection to wanting to wake up, wanting to free our own heart, but seeing that the freeing of our own heart is not separate from the freeing of the heart of all beings everywhere, including the ones we don't like, the ones we might find really difficult, all beings human and non-human. And the inviting of that quality of a bodhisattva. And Jack, in his book, The Wise Heart, describes 3 qualities of a bodhisattva. He says, she or he first accepts the truth of their situation. You know, it's just the basic, it's the practice of like, okay, what's here right now is here. Can I say yes to this? It's accepting what's true. Now, there may be something in your life right now that you wish were different. But in order to open your heart, you really have to accept the truth of what is here right now. There may be something you're grieving right now. It might feel easier to avoid that. But the truth is, this is what's here now. And the invitation is to open to it. So facing the truth of our experience, facing the truth of, you know, where we are right now in the pandemic, in the political life with 24 or so days more till the inauguration of new administration, new leadership, facing the truth and turning towards the difficulties, shining the light of understanding on the difficulties in our own life, the difficulties in our collective life. And secondly, to work for peace within herself, himself, as the bodhisattva. Engage in trainings and practices to do 2 things, to let go of afflictive states and to cultivate beneficial states of heart and mind. What is known as abandoning the unskillful and cultivating the good. I've spoken about this in recent weeks, this practice of letting go of what doesn't serve us, you know, letting go of clinging, letting go of hatred, letting go of anger and blame and all of these qualities, and cultivating compassion, loving kindness, forgiveness, joy, equanimity, mindfulness, cultivating these qualities, cultivating qualities that will ennoble us, that will open our hearts, and letting go of those that close us down, that keep us caught in suffering. So these practices, so first, the bodhisattva sees herself or himself as, accepts the truth of their situation, turns the light of practice on their situation. And third, which is the one I want to focus on here, is the bodhisattva envisions actions and a path of liberation for herself, her community, her world, and commits to working to those ends. And that's what I'm kind of speaking to here today, that envisioning. How is it? What is it that I want to do, that I choose to do, to help open my own heart and to help heal the suffering of the world? You know, in the Jewish tradition, tikkun olam, you know, repairing the world, helping heal the tears and the breakages. In all of these traditions, the wisdom and the compassion of engaging with the world. We're not here just for ourselves. We're here to awaken our own hearts, but we're here to support others in awakening their hearts and their minds, and to live and to help others, to open our hearts in compassion to others. Jack says, envisioning has enormous power. With our vision and imagination, we can help create the future. Envisioning sets our direction. marshals our resources, makes the unmanifest possible. So envisioning, creating the future. So the invitation now here at this time, this time in these days or in these weeks, the invitation to reflect on hope, on possibility, on what it is that each one of us might envision, might choose to, if you like, choose as our story for ourselves. And I use that term story here in an intentional way, because you're probably familiar that in Buddhism, often stories get a bad rap. People, I'm just getting caught up in my stories, or she's getting caught up in her stories. These narratives we're creating. And in that way, it's a helpful thing to see our stories and our narratives in that sense. When we're getting, life is so hard, nothing's ever going to work out for me. That's a negative story that we can get caught up in. But we can engage in a much more kind of helpful, beneficial story that can be the image for us. It could be the story of the Bodhisattva. It doesn't have to be, and I'm not talking just about the Bodhisattva today, where we actually see ourselves as a Bodhisattva. We commit to the vow of a Bodhisattva to help awaken all beings. Wonderful, all beings are numberless. I vow to liberate them all. It seems like, wow, how do you do that? But to have that vision. But it doesn't have to be just the Bodhisattva vow. What I'm inviting today is really to connect with your story, or a possible story for yourself. Whatever, coming back to that Mary Oliver's wonderful question, tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Even if we're in our 70s or our 80s, or, maybe if we'd have a diagnosis or we're in hospice care, we might have days or weeks or hours left in our life. I think it's still a really essential question. Whatever, maybe that's not the same language, maybe you could put it in your own language. How do I use the remaining minutes of my life? Just to find freedom at the moment of death, even if you only had 10 minutes left in your life, to find that freedom. And who knows, and I don't know, but who knows, being at peace at the time of death, where that might have some impact on something that might happen to you after your death. Maybe the bardo is true, the Tibetan Buddhist notion of the time between death and rebirth, or going into another realm, that I certainly don't claim to know for certain. But even, that time of death, how we meet our death, or even the moments after, the time after death, may have an impact on what happens afterwards. I'm agnostic about it, but I also have a lot of respect for Buddhist traditions and other traditions that see possibilities of life after death. Keep the mind open. That's my current relationship to that, but certainly that possibility. So wherever we are in our life, what is that? Is there a story of hope, of possibility? Is a story where it's not just about us, but about our world as well? It is about us. What is it? How might I live my own life? How might I relate to my practice, to meditation, to mindfulness, to compassion, to these practices that might ennoble my life, that might bring me more peace, more well-being, more happiness? And how does that relate to the world at large? to all beings, to beings, you know, who I know, beings that I don't know. Can my own opening of my own heart help ease the suffering of others? You know, so that my awakening, my opening of the heart is not just about me or those close to me, but is about really inexorably connected with the well-being of all others. You know, there's that beautiful kind of image of the butterfly, you know, flapping its wings, you know, off the coast of Africa, and, you know, what the impact on that, you know, the impact of the smallest things. You know, another reflection is that the air that we're breathing is air that contains, you know, molecules that the Buddha breathed, that Jesus breathed, that Moses breathed, that these, you know, St. Teresa breathed, that others, these wise beings breathed, that it's all, you know, it's much more, we're much more permeable than we give credit for. I think we think of ourselves as these solid beings that kind of end here or end here, and yet think of how words come in, how air comes in, how life comes into us and then comes out of us again. You know, we can, these images, these stories can really inform our intentions as we go into, you know, if we go into the year ahead, you know, to think of that as a period. You know, it's a mind creation, as all of these things are mind creations. It's a kind of a reflection of the turning of the, you know, the seasons and the world, but artificial. And yet we can use these, what may be artificial, to really help focus the mind, gather our attention, and invite a reflection of the time ahead. So I'm going to see if there's anything more that I would like to share before we get into a meditation. Maybe I had a couple of other things from Rilke. He it might be a good way of leading us into the meditation. This one really, I hadn't heard this one before, and it really grabbed hold of me. Rilke said, "Let life happen to you. Believe me, life is in the right, always. Let life happen to you. Believe me, life is in the right, always." A couple more. He said, "The only journey is the one within. The only journey is the one within." You know, you might say it in another way, that, you know, the essential journey is the one within, that kind of the one that we come out of, we go into, and then kind of out of that we gain our wisdom, our clarity, our insight, whatever, from that inner journey. And this one, the purpose of life is to be defeated by greater and greater things. It's kind of maybe one worth reflecting on. The purpose of life is to be defeated by greater and greater things. So I invite you to come into a comfortable, relaxed meditation posture. Settling in, closing your eyes if that's helpful for you. letting your attention come inward, letting your attention drop out of the thinking mode, come down into the body. Lots of thoughts being shared and easily can be up in our heads, but inviting that kind of dropping down into the body, feeling your connection with the seat beneath you, your feet with the floor. You might take a few deeper breaths to help you relax and settle into being here. Notice if there's tightness or tension, and how the breath can be helpful in relaxing any areas of tension, of contraction. Imagine you're inflating a balloon and then letting the air out as you breathe out, letting go of any tension, any tightness, any contraction, any holding as you breathe out. And as you take a couple of deeper breaths, you could invite a smile to your face. If you're inclined to do that, in just helping the body, the mind relax with a smile. Thinking of a loved one or somebody who easily makes you feel happy, if that's helpful to you. Letting the smile come down into your heart. Maybe taking a moment to reflect on some things in your life that you're grateful for. As another way of stepping out of the kind of externally focus on what's not right, what's wrong. Just appreciating what you already have. Maybe this practice, loved ones, this body, this health, so many things in our life that we can take for granted. Just holding it all, letting the breath relax back into its natural rhythm. Opening to whatever is present for you in the body and in the heart and in the mind. This very simple but not always easy practice of opening to whatever is here, opening to what's present for you in the body and emotions, thoughts, with the invitation to hold everything that's present with kindness and with acceptance. Nothing needs to be rejected or pushed away. Inviting a receptive, open-hearted attention to what you're feeling, what you're experiencing right now. Can you hold this with kindness? if there's something that's difficult or painful, it can be helpful just to place a hand on your heart, perhaps on your belly, and hold your experience. This is an expression of holding your experience with kindness, with care, with compassion. If there is some pain, or if there's some suffering, it could be just a simple wish for yourself. May I be happy, or may I be safe. May I be kind to myself. Or just the expression, I care about this suffering. And inviting your heart to be as open as it can be right now to all that's present, and even what's not obviously present right now. You might inquire, is there something maybe that you've pushed down, or you've repressed, or you've wanted to avoid because it has felt too difficult or too much, or that there wasn't the space to open to this on top of everything else? And just with a lot of kindness, open to anything that might want to come into awareness. And if something comes up, just notice, be aware of how it feels in your body, particularly how it may feel in the area of the torso, the chest, the belly, this whole area. Or in the face, around the eyes, the mouth, the face, facial muscles. Is there any unmourned grief that it would serve you to invite to the table, to make space for? It might be something that's very old, going back to childhood or earlier in your life. Something more recent, whatever might be present. And maybe there's nothing comes up for you. Just opening then to whatever you're noticing in the body and thoughts and the mind, the heart. See whatever is present right now. See if you can make space for it. Meet it with kindness, with care. With acceptance. notice how even the most difficult feelings can change when we make space for them, when we recognize them and allow them to be here. We make friends with them. As Rilke said in another passage, he spoke about all of the monsters in our lives, all of the most difficult things, are just, the image he used is princesses waiting to be met with beauty and courage, with beauty and with courage. That in the meeting of our sorrows, of our grief, of our pain, with kindness, with acceptance, with this attitude of allowing, attitude of care, that the experiences themselves change. In Buddhism, you would talk of it as a dependent arising, what we call the sorrow or the grief depends in itself on how it's met and is transformed in how it's met. It's not like this thing with a separate existence. How we meet it is actually creates what it is. And so when we meet our experience wholeheartedly, our experience is in fact transformed. It's changed. It's changed by the quality of heart with which we meet it. I finish with some reflections. I shared some of these a few weeks ago from Václav Havel, the great playwright who became president of Czechoslovakia, struggled against the communist regime there and later the Czech Republic. He spoke about hope. He said, hope is not prognostication. It's not based on what we think will happen or what chances are of things to happen. He says it's an orientation of the spirit, an orientation of the heart. He says it transcends the world that is immediately experienced and is anchored somewhere beyond its horizons. He said hope is an ability to work for something because it's good, not just because it stands a chance to succeed. He says the more unpropitious the situation in which we demonstrate hope, the deeper that hope is. It doesn't depend on how it turns out. And he says, but history is not something that takes place somewhere. It takes place here. We all contribute to making it. If bringing back some human dimension to the world depends on anything, it depends on how we acquit ourselves in the here and now. So bringing this hope and being present here and now with kindness, with acceptance. This one more quote from Rilke. I want to be with people who know secret things, or else alone. I want to be with people who know secret things, or else alone. I interpret the secret not as exclusive, but deep things, deep things of the heart, deep secrets of the heart. So I invite you to come into some standing with Emily for the movement. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugh. Yes, everyone, find your feet and just rock from side to side. And then turn your palms out and raise your arms up, reaching up. And then soften your shoulders and cultivate the energy of the sky, of the sun, of the faraway planets. And bring that energy in to your heart. And then gather the energy of this group, all of us together, seeking compassion, kindness, cultivating the good, and bring that to your heart. And then gather the abundant energy of the earth, that which nourishes us, and bring that to your heart. And now widen your feet and spread your arms and just take a moment to feel this space around you. Turning one way and then the other. And then slow it down. And again, raise your arms high, grasp your left wrist in your right hand. Inhale, reaching up, and exhale to the other side. Breathing into that rib cage. Exhaling here. And then inhale up. Switch hands. Take a breath in and reach up. And then tilt over. Exhaling to tilt. Breathing into your top rib cage. Exhaling here to soften. And inhale to center. Float your arms down. And then bring your hands up to cactus. This is a good shoulder move. Holding your hands up, then drop them down. Lifting up and lower and up and lower. Extend out and bring them down. Roll your shoulders. Roll them the other way. And then bring your hands behind your back, clasping them. And on the inhale, reach your head up, the chest up, and lengthen the elbows away from your body. And exhale, soften. Inhale, lift up. And soften. Last time. Inhale, lifting up. And exhale, soften. And now we'll go into a brief forward bend, placing your hands above your knees. Inhale deeply. And exhale, lower down. Allowing your head and your shoulders and your middle back all to drop down. Feeling the pull of gravity. Pressing on your feet to support your body, engaging your leg muscles. Deep inhale here. Exhale in place. And then place your hands above your knees and roll up, reaching up, pressing on your feet to rise, placing your hands to heart center and release to the sky, to us, and to the earth.
Thank you, Emily. Beautiful as always. Thank you so much. So grateful for all that you offer, and it's so beneficial for us to come into our bodies and to balance the kind of the sitting with the movement, and that's so lovely. Thank you so much. And just for today, apologies. I went on longer than I would normally go on. So what I would invite us to do is to have our sharing in the full group, and then next week, the first week of the new year, we'll definitely have a session of small groups, breakout groups, so we can share one-on-one or with a few others. But for now, an invitation to share in the chat anything that's come up for you, anything that might have struck you from what I shared in the talk, or anything from the meditation or from the movement. Please feel free, no obligation, but if you would like to just share a little bit about what's going on for you. Also, I mean, feel free as well, if you have any questions, to put them there. I may not be able to deal with everything, respond to questions, all of the questions, but I do save the chat and go back to it, read it. So what I'd like to do is invite anyone who would like to share just what's alive for you, relatively briefly, so that we have some time to hear from a few people. But if anyone would like to, you can raise your hand, or you could let us know in the chat to do that. Just seeing if there's any hands raised. Thank you for sharing in the chat. Sorry to hear of you're going through a challenging time. Kerry, thank you for sharing that. Bill and Bonnie, I feel my energy has been freed up. That's good. Nice to hear. And good to hear. And yes, anyone, if you'd like to, and no problem if everyone is feels good. No need to ask anything or share anything. But if you'd like to, there is an opportunity to do that. So.
I think Cindy has her hand up, Hugh.
Thank you, Pat. Cindy.
Hi, Hugh. Happy New Year, and everyone. That was wonderful today. And it also raised again a question that perhaps you could address in another talk, which is the difference between story, and you mentioned positive stories, but the difference between story, experience, and what one may need to claim in terms of unmourned grief. I think sometimes I get confused by the differences and end up negating my own quote, story / experience. So anyway, it's just something I put out there, possibly to be addressed at some point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you. Yeah, that's such an important question. It needs can benefit from further elaboration. And what I share just very briefly here is, that talking about story. I mentioned that story, as almost everybody here probably knows, it kind of tends to have a bit of a pejorative connotation within the Buddhist kind of, somebody's stories. And that does, as I mentioned, does point to something that's real, that we do create stories that are often really unhelpful ones. And what I think it would be more helpful to do within a kind of meditative and a Buddhist kind of milieu is to indicate that we're really talking about those kind of stories that are unhelpful to us, because there's no value in stories like, that just keep us locked in suffering. If I've got a story of like, oh, my life is so terrible, nobody's ever been good to me, that's not going to be, that's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm just going to keep on believing that, and my world will kind of reflect that, because other people will say, oh, wow, that's a very, they'll respond to that. So, within Buddhism, not Buddhism, I don't mean Buddhism, but within the kind of the community, as we've kind of developed, that tends to be the kind of the expression. And obviously, stories that don't support us, that lead us to suffering, are to be let go of. They're to be seen and let go of. But what tends to get lost a little bit, and that's what I was kind of trying to get at in the talk, was that there are visions, there are kind of more hopeful views, images, visions of our life that are actually incredibly beneficial to us. If we didn't have those, and if those weren't really alive, then what we would tend to do would be just to act out old habits. So our vision really creates our life, and we do it implicitly anyway. But what I'm saying is it actually supports us to elevate that to a conscious level. And the key really, and I think this gets to something in your question, the key really is to ask ourselves about any story, any narrative, any vision that we create. Does this lead to greater freedom? Does this lead to greater happiness, to greater well-being? Or does it lead me to cling to more suffering? And that's really the key. Does this way of seeing, which could be a vision, an image of ourselves, something, a picture of ourselves, if we're engaged in social justice work, the vision of a bodhisattva, of viewing ourselves in the light of, the civil rights movement, for example, or of the women's movement or LGBT movement, seeing ourselves within that vision, within that history, can be incredibly empowering, inspiring to us. It can be like, I'm not just doing this on my own. I'm really within this current that's carrying us all along. That notion of bending the arc of history towards justice, seeing that, even that phrase is a kind of a vision, an image, So that's really what I'm talking about. This doesn't have to be an elaborate story. Could be just an image, could be a view of ourselves, could be a few lines of poetry that kind of like, our one wild and precious life. And our experience, as you've asked, Cindy, I think of this practice very much as, and relate to it very much as a phenomenological practice. It's based on phenomena as we experience and understand, the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions, what happens, that we're really basing our, where we go and the choices we make based on it, our experience. But that doesn't in any way mean that our images, our views, our narratives are also part of what we create. So that there's kind of what's happened, that's what we pay attention to as phenomena. But we can also, our actions are part of that, the fullness of our experience as well. The practice of cultivation and creating wise visions, narratives, images, stories, is part of the practice of cultivating wise, cultivating the good, I think, cultivating what's going to lead to freedom. So that's maybe a little bit of a beginning to responding, Cindy, but thank you so much for that. Maybe if there's one more, and thank you everyone for sharing in the chat, and look forward to looking to that in a few minutes. And I see that Jeff has a virtual hand up. Is Jeff there? Yeah, Jeff.
Yeah. Thank you, Hugh. No, today had me thinking about something that I heard years ago. I guess it was in the context of like a recovery or healing process, that the fruit of that was not escape or a ticket out, but essentially that the fruit of that was a return to life. And I think for me at that time, that was very meaningful and resonated today in terms of the Bodhisattva idea as well. And I have to remind myself of that the reward of, working on oneself, whatever, is I get to come back to life and connect. So
beautiful. Thank you, Jeff. That's so true, isn't it? That the journey is often a really, a difficult one, a painful one, full of fallen branches and stones, as Mary Oliver says in the poem, The Journey. But it is, as you've said, it's a journey back to, it's a return to life, hearing that inner voice that she speaks about in the poem, that, that takes us deeper and deeper into our life, determined to do the only thing we can do, determined to save the only life we can save, which is, really what you're saying, the return to life, So thank you so much for that, Jeff. Let's just take a few minutes to have a final meditation. It's lovely to see you, Rachel, and your child is named. You want to introduce yourself?
This is Turner.
Turner. It's wonderful to have you with us. We often have cats and dogs but we don't have enough children, I think. So feel free to bring them in the future. Nice to see you. Welcome. So we'll just do a relatively short meditation to finish. This will just be 6 or 7 minutes, but an opportunity to kind of provide a little bit of internal and collective closing of the circle. So just taking some moments to settle again, relaxing, taking a few breaths if that's helpful. Nice deep in breath and out breath. Just bringing awareness to what's present right now in the body, the heart and the mind. And meeting it with kindness, with care, with acceptance. This receptive awareness of whatever is present, whatever may be coming from outside, sounds and images and aromas, anything that's coming from outside, and what's coming from inside, from our response to what's going on in the inner and the outer. A receptive awareness to our inner life and to our experience. Holding this moment, this experience with care and kindness. Resting attention on the breath if that's helpful. Just the in-breath and the out-breath. Just remembering this, the resource of the breath that we can connect with, come back to, the breath that is such a reflection of our experience, where it tends to be short when we're tense and tight and stressed, and more relaxed when we're more at ease, more peaceful. So the simple act of bringing awareness to our breathing has a natural quality of tending to relax us, noticing how we're not relaxed when we're not at ease, and then just coming back. And as a way of coming out of our more difficult stories, the stories of, sometimes they're just stories of plans, memories, daydreams, distractions. Not in any way a problem if they can be met too with kindness. And the breath can help us, and the body can help us come home to ourselves. Just reflecting for a moment on your own situation, your own life. Is there anything coming out of our time together today that can help orient you, help you clarify intentions? Is there a hope that you can nurture, cultivate as you go back into the day and the week and the beginning of a new year? An aspiration, intention, a hope, a vision that you can keep coming back to, that you can hold with kindness, not too tightly, but nurturing. Like your own personal bonsai tree. Coming back to your heart, coming back to what matters. Franz Kafka said that patience is the master key to every situation. And Rilke reflected on patience and on being an artist, and a number of people in this community are artists and see themselves very consciously as artists. And maybe even if you don't see yourself as an artist, I think we're all artists in our own way. We create our art and we create our life. And this is what Rilke said about being an artist. He said, being an artist means not reckoning and counting, but ripening like the tree, which does not force its sap and stands confident in the storms of spring, without the fear that after them may come no summer. It does come, but it comes only to the patient, who are there as though eternity lay before them, so unconcernedly still and wide. I learn it daily, learn it with pain to which I am grateful. Patience is everything. Very related. We had a short discussion last week about T.S. Eliot and shared some of his 4 quartets, but I recall the line where he speaks about humility. He says, the only wisdom is the wisdom of humility. Humility is endless, I think. And Rilke says patience is everything, and patience and humility are 2 qualities, I think, very related to each other, that support us in our practice and our life. Many, many thanks to all of you for your presence and your practice today. And it's been really a joy to be with you again. I'm going to share a couple of things and then pass it to Pat, or if Pat is doing the announcements today, or if there's
Christine.
See?
Oh, it's Christine today.
Oh, Christine today. Okay, great. Thank you, Christine. Just share that the theme today is one, the kind of the hope and the unmourned grief is very much one that's alive with me in these times. And I wanted to share that in early January, I have a day-long retreat. It's called a day of renewal and hope. And it kind of speaks to this time that we're living in right now, and what we can let go of and what we can cultivate. And so check it out if you're interested on the IMCW website, January 9th. And as a new offering, it's a new possibility. If you're not able to make the whole day, you can do either the morning or the afternoon. So that's, preferably the whole day, but also you could, if you can only do part. So that's that one. Interestingly, I have it this afternoon. I have a session on Insight Timer at 5:03 p.m. And I think that was a mistake I made. It was supposed to be 9 a.m., but it came out as 5:03. But by the time Insight Timer had advertised it, 500 or 600 people had signed up. So I thought, well, why not offer this at 5:03 today? So it's on working with the body. And I had one this morning at 9 and have another one at 5 today. So it'd be a nice shorter session if anyone's interested. And I think, I'm trying to think in other things coming up. I invite you to check out my website. I'll put it on there, as well as the IMCW and the Center for Mindful Living website. We'll hear more about that in a moment. One final thing, and this almost everyone is aware of, but there's no charge for the class, but you're invited if you're able and inclined to make a donation, dana, generosity in the Pali language, how the teachings have come down to us through 2,500 years. And that's how we help offer these classes freely and are supported by the community in doing this. And it's a lovely practice that I'm very committed to continuing in the best way I can. So thank you for your support. And